May 15, 1943. North Atlantic, 300 miles west of Ireland. The sea is black beneath a moonless sky, and U-456 cuts through the water at periscope depth. Inside the control room, 23 men move through their routines with practiced efficiency. Captain Lieutenant Max Martin Teichert studies the convoy plot, calculating angles and distances. They've been tracking this merchant group for 6 hours, waiting for the moment to strike. The hydrophone operator raises his hand. Something's wrong. There's a sound, faint at first, then building, a metallic pinging that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. The noise grows louder, sharper. It reverberates through the hull, through the very bones of the men inside. Within minutes, crew members are clutching their heads. Some are vomiting. The boat's engineer reports that several men have collapsed. Teichert has no choice. He orders the ballast tanks blown and surfaces into the darkness. When dawn breaks, a British frigate finds them there, the entire crew standing on the conning tower with their hands raised, desperate to escape whatever hell had been unleashed beneath the waves. This was not depth charges, not torpedoes, not any conventional weapon. This was something entirely new, a device so secret that its very existence would remain classified for decades. A weapon that turned a U-boat's greatest strength, its ability to hide in the depths, into a prison of unbearable torment. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached a critical juncture. German U-boats were sinking merchant vessels faster than the Allies could replace them. In the first 20 days of March alone, 97 ships went to the bottom, representing over 500,000 tons of vital supplies. The convoy system provided some protection, but U-boats had adapted. They hunted in wolf packs, coordinated attacks that overwhelmed escort vessels. The mathematics were brutally simple. Britain needed 700,000 tons of supplies to reach port each month merely to survive. In March 1943, losses exceeded that figure. Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire war. The existing countermeasures were proving inadequate. Depth charges required destroyers to pass directly over a submarine's estimated position, dropping 200-pound charges set to detonate at specific depths. The problem was one of geometry and probability. A U-boat could be anywhere within a 3-dimensional volume of ocean. The average depth charge attack used between 6 and 12 charges, creating a pattern perhaps 100 meters across. A submarine detecting the attack could dive deeper, rise shallower, or simply move laterally. The kill probability of a single attack was estimated at less than 5%. ASDIC, what the Americans called sonar, could detect submarines but only within limited ranges and conditions. Thermoclines, water layers of different temperatures, created blind spots. A skilled U-boat commander could slip beneath a temperature gradient and become effectively invisible. Moreover, ASDIC required the hunting ship to maintain steady speed and course, making it vulnerable to counterattack. The Admiralty needed something that could reach into those dark waters and force submarines to reveal themselves, something that didn't rely on lucky proximity or perfect conditions. They needed a weapon that made the submarine itself unbearable to its crew. The solution emerged from the Admiralty's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, a division responsible for unconventional approaches to naval warfare. In late 1942, scientists at the research facility in Havant began exploring the properties of underwater sound propagation. The human ear can detect frequencies between roughly 20 and 20,000 hertz. But sound travels differently underwater than through air, approximately 4.3 times faster, with far less attenuation over distance. The team, led by physicist Dr. Robert Whitmore, theorized that specific low-frequency sound waves could be transmitted through a submarine's hull and create physiological effects on the crew inside. The device they developed became known officially as the Type 782 Underwater Oscillator, though those who knew of its existence simply called it the howler. The mechanism was elegantly simple in concept, fiendishly complex in execution. At its core sat a magnetostrictive transducer, a device that converted electrical energy into mechanical vibration. The transducer consisted of stacked laminations of nickel alloy, each layer precisely 0.5 millimeters thick. When electrical current passed through surrounding coils, the magnetic field caused the nickel to physically expand and contract at frequencies determined by the input signal. This assembly, weighing approximately 45 kilograms, was housed within a streamlined pod, roughly the size of a large suitcase, 600 millimeters long, 300 millimeters in diameter. The pod was filled with castor oil for acoustic coupling and sealed with rubber gaskets rated to withstand pressures at 300 meters depth. The outer casing was mild steel, painted in standard Admiralty gray. Nothing about its external appearance suggested its purpose. The oscillator could generate continuous sound waves between 180 and 220 hertz, frequencies too low to be heard consciously, but devastating to human physiology. At maximum power, drawing 2,000 watts from the ship's electrical system, it produced sound pressure levels exceeding 190 decibels at 1 meter distance. For context, a jet engine at close range produces about 140 decibels. The difference is logarithmic. Every 10 decibels represents a tenfold increase in intensity. The oscillator was mounted on a retractable arm beneath the hull of escort vessels, positioned to project sound waves downward and forward. The mounting assembly included rubber isolation mounts to prevent the vibrations from affecting the host ship. A cooling system circulated seawater through channels in the housing to prevent overheating during extended operation. Control equipment occupied a dedicated cabinet in the ship's operations room, operated by a technician who could adjust frequency and power output. Production began at the Vickers facility in Barrow-in-Furness in January 1943. Exact numbers remain classified, but documentary evidence suggests approximately 240 units were manufactured during the war. Initial installation prioritized the newest escort vessels, River-class frigates and Castle-class corvettes, though some older destroyers were retrofitted during scheduled maintenance periods. The installation process required 3 days in dry dock and the work of specialized electrical fitters who had undergone security clearance. Even the ship's regular crew were told only that new submarine detection equipment was being fitted. Operational deployment began in April 1943. Coinciding with the period historians would later call the turning point of the Atlantic campaign. The protocol was specific. When ASDIC detected a submarine at ranges between 400 and 1,200 meters, the Type 782 would be activated. The hunting ship would proceed toward the contact at slow speed, roughly 8 knots, to minimize self-generated noise. The oscillator would be set to sweep slowly between 180 and 210 hertz. A range testing had shown to be most effective. The effects on U-boat crews were documented through interrogation of survivors and, after the war, through captured German naval medical records. The sound waves penetrated the pressure hull, which was designed to keep water pressure out, not sound waves in. Inside, the low-frequency vibrations created what physiologists call whole-body resonance. Human organs and body cavities have natural resonant frequencies. The inner ear, the lungs, the eyeballs, each vibrates sympathetically when exposed to specific frequencies. At 180 to 220 hertz, multiple body systems resonate simultaneously. Initial symptoms appeared within 2 to 3 minutes of exposure. Men reported severe nausea, vertigo, and visual disturbances. The vibrations affected the fluid in the inner ear, destroying the sense of balance. Several survivors described the sensation as being turned inside out. After 5 minutes, the effects became debilitating. Vomiting was universal. Some men experienced temporary blindness. Others reported feeling their internal organs vibrating, a sensation so profoundly disturbing that it induced panic even in experienced submariners. The psychological impact compounded the physical. A submarine is a sealed metal tube. There is no escape, no way to flee. The sound came from everywhere, relentless and inescapable. After 10 minutes of exposure, crew members were found to be effectively incapacitated. German medical officers noted cases of temporary hearing loss, persistent vertigo lasting days after exposure, and what would now be recognized as acute stress reactions. No deaths were directly attributed to the device, but its purpose was not to kill. It was to force surrender. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The Germans were aware that something new had been deployed, but they struggled to understand it. U-boat commanders reported new enemy equipment producing unbearable sounds in their patrol reports. Naval intelligence in Berlin initially suspected it was some form of acoustic homing torpedo, though this didn't explain why it never detonated. Some theorized the British had developed a way to amplify ASDIC pulses to painful levels. The truth remained beyond their grasp. German attempts to counter the device were limited by their incomplete understanding. Some U-boats experimented with rubber sound-damping tiles on interior bulkheads, but low-frequency sound penetrates such barriers easily. Others tried remaining at extreme depth, below 200 meters, but this brought its own dangers and limited operational effectiveness. There was no technical counter. The Kriegsmarine never developed an equivalent weapon. German naval research had explored acoustic concepts, but their efforts focused on listening devices and acoustic homing torpedoes rather than sonic weapons. The Americans, once briefed on the Type 782 in late 1943, expressed interest but ultimately decided not to pursue production. Their reasoning was practical. By that point, the Atlantic campaign had shifted in the Allies' favor, and the considerable resources required for manufacturing were deemed better spent on existing systems. The Soviet Navy, despite receiving considerable technical information from Britain under wartime cooperation agreements, shows no evidence of developing similar devices. The Type 782 remained a uniquely British solution to a uniquely desperate problem. What made it particularly effective was the combination of technical innovation and operational secrecy. German submariners couldn't prepare for what they didn't understand. Unlike depth charges, which they'd trained to endure, or aircraft attacks, which they could attempt to evade, this was an invisible assault that bypassed all their training and courage. It rendered their steel fortress into a resonating torture chamber. The actual impact of the Type 782 on the Battle of the Atlantic remains difficult to quantify precisely. Official British records credit the device with contributing to the surrender or scuttling of 17 U-boats between May and December 1943. However, this figure must be approached with caution. Many U-boat encounters involved multiple weapon systems, depth charges, radar-directed gunnery, aerial bombs. Determining which factor proved decisive is often impossible. What is documented beyond dispute is the collapse of German submarine effectiveness during this period. In May 1943, 41 U-boats were lost, an unsustainable rate that prompted Admiral Dönitz to temporarily withdraw his boats from the North Atlantic. Whilst this cannot be attributed solely to the Type 782, interrogation reports from captured crews repeatedly mention the sound weapon as a source of particular dread. The psychological impact extended beyond individual encounters. U-boat crews operated in an environment of extreme stress under the best circumstances. Knowledge that the British possessed a weapon that could reach inside their boats and incapacitate them added another layer of psychological burden. Several German submariners reported during interrogation that the possibility of encountering the sound device affected crew morale more than the increased effectiveness of conventional weapons. The device influenced post-war thinking about naval warfare, though not in ways immediately obvious. Research into acoustic weapons continued at the Admiralty Underwater Weapons Establishment through the 1950s, though whether operational systems were deployed remains classified. Modern navies certainly understand the principle. Active sonar systems are known to pose risks to marine life precisely because of their intense sound pressure levels. Some modern anti-submarine warfare concepts involve acoustic disruption, though details remain understandably secret. Of the 240 Type 782 units produced, none are known to survive in museum collections. Most were likely scrapped during post-war demobilization. The technical specifications remained classified until 1982, and even now, certain operational parameters are redacted from declassified documents. This secrecy, maintained for nearly 4 decades after the war's end, suggests the technology retained potential applications or revealed vulnerabilities that military planners wished to keep confidential. The story of the Type 782 illuminates a broader truth about technological warfare. Innovation emerges not just from scientific advancement, but from desperate necessity, meeting creative thinking. The scientists at Havant weren't working with exotic materials or revolutionary physics. They were applying known principles in novel ways, weaponizing sound waves that had always existed, making the ocean itself inhospitable to those who sought to hide within it. In this, it was quintessentially British, practical, unconventional, and devastatingly effective in ways that sidestepped direct confrontation. The device represented a fundamental shift in how submarines could be threatened. For centuries, naval warfare meant ships fighting ships on the surface. Submarines introduced a new dimension, a depth that made them nearly invulnerable to traditional weapons. The Type 782 turned that dimension against them. It made their protection into a prison, their steel hull into a conductor of their own torment. It didn't need to destroy. It merely needed to make staying submerged more unbearable than capture. Consider the position of those German submariners, committed to their duty, trained to withstand depth-charge attacks and aerial assault, suddenly confronted with something that bypassed all their defenses and struck directly at their bodies and minds. The choice they faced was absolute: endure what was effectively torture or surface into likely captivity, but blessed silence. That hundreds of men chose surrender speaks to the weapon's effectiveness more than any technical specification could. May 15th, 1943. North Atlantic, 300 miles west of Ireland. U-456 lies on the surface, her crew standing with raised hands as HMS Jed approaches through the dawn. Below in the abandoned control room, the lights still burn, instruments still function, the boat entirely capable of diving and fighting. But not one man will go back inside. They've experienced something their training never prepared them for, something that turned their fortress into a resonating chamber of unbearable sensation. In 3 hours, they'll be prisoners of war. In 3 months, 41 of their fellow submariners will be dead, the U-boat offensive broken. History would remember May 1943 as the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, the moment when technology and tactics finally shifted the balance. But for the men of U-456, the turning point was simpler and more personal. The moment when the silent depths became a place of sound so terrible that the sky, even filled with enemies, seemed preferable to one more second below. The weapon that achieved this wasn't a bigger bomb or a faster ship. It was 45 kilograms of nickel alloy oscillating at 190 hertz, proving that sometimes the most effective way to win a battle is to make the enemy's position simply unendurable. The Type 782 didn't need to sink U-boats. It just needed to make staying underwater worse than surrender. And in the cold mathematics of total war, that was more than enough.